Hey everybody, this is Peter with Tabletop Gaming Guild, and today I'm excited to be back with another role-playing game review for you. And we received recently some books from Free League Publishing, and this time they sent us their Lord of the Rings role-playing for the 5th edition rule set. Now, this is an adaptation of their previously released game, The One Ring Second Edition, and it's its own standalone game. It has a D6 system, but they have adapted that game into this, the Lord of the Rings role playing for 5th edition. So those of you out there who already play games using the 5th edition rule set can now dive in a little bit easier to their version of Middle Earth in role playing. So I'm very excited to receive this. I can't wait to check it out. We've received it here in the beautiful hardcover as well as the PDF. And like I like to do here in our reviews, we're going to go ahead and go away from the table here, and we're going to go to a computer and pull up the PDF so that you all can get a better view of what the book is looking like on the inside. We'll talk a little bit about some of the mechanics of the game, things that they've added to the 5th edition rule set, things that they've taken away from the 5th edition rule set so that they could adapt this previous game. If you'd like to check out our review for the One Ring Second Edition, you can find that video here on our channel. It's a fantastic standalone game, and if you're interested in trying to learn some new mechanics, I would say definitely dive into the One Ring Second Edition. But if you love the 5th edition rule set and it's the one that you're most comfortable with, then this is going to be a great way for you to dive into Middle Earth once again. So let's go ahead and step away from the table here. Let's head to the computer and I'll pull up the PDF and we'll see what this game is all about. All right, everybody, so here we are with the Lord of the Rings role-playing for the 5e rule set. It says it at the very bottom of the page, 5th edition role-playing in the world of Lord of the Rings, based on the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. As a lot of you might know, this is not the very first time that we've been able to play in the world of Middle Earth for the 5th edition rule set. Cubicle 7, another company, had brought that out a while back, Adventures in Middle Earth. But having lost the rights to that and Free League picking those up, this is their adaptation of the One Ring Second Edition for the 5th edition rule set. The One Ring Second Edition is a fantastic game. Free League did a wonderful job creating it, and then they've done a really nice job of adapting it for the 5th edition rule set for those of you out there who love playing 5th edition. Maybe you've never played any other type of role-playing game before or after or since. But I started with the 5th edition rule set, so it does have a special place in my heart. I've played it for the longest out of all of the game systems that I currently play. And let's go ahead and dive on into the book. So we have this beautiful piece of art of Gandalf writing Shadowfax. They look like they're in a hurry to get somewhere. But yeah, I think it's great. They've done a really nice job with all of their artwork before Free League Publishing, and that hasn't changed with this at all. Some really great pieces of art throughout the book. We have this wonderful map of Eriador, which is the area where the majority of the game is supposed to be taking place. So we have this really beautiful map here going from as far to the west as Lindon, down south to Rohan, as far east as the Misty Mountains, and to the north we have the Ice Bay of Furshell. So big area of land that really, honestly, if you mostly know just the Lord of the Rings, we don't know a whole lot about this area. There's some history and some lore. We spend a little bit of time in the Shire, and then traveling past the Misty Mountains and down through Rohan. But in just all this area here is kind of untapped for a lot of people. And so I love that we have a game that's going to be taking place there. The book itself is broken down into a prologue, giving some information about the era in which this game is going to be played. And then we have New Rules, which is a chapter all about how Free League is changing or adding to the 5th edition rule set. So we'll go over that here in just a moment. We also have some adventurers information, how you're going to make your characters and the options that you have to choose from. And then we have rewards and virtues, which is another part of your characters, as well as rewards, items that you can get in the game. Then we have Chapter 5, which is all about the adventuring phases of the game. And then we have the fellowship phases of the game in Chapter 6. And those are kind of the two gameplays that you're going to be having between the adventurer phases and the fellowship phases. Chapter 7 onward is mostly for the lore master. So Chapter 7 specifically is information for the lore master about running the game. And then we have information about the shadow in Chapter 8, the world in Chapter 9, and then we do have some appendix as well. So we're going to go through this rather quickly, giving you just some information about each of these chapters, but let's go ahead and keep on going. So the next couple pages are the introduction work of art. So I'm going to switch over to a double page so that we can see the full spread. All of the art here is the same art that they utilized for the One Ring 2nd edition. I personally really enjoy this art style. It's a little modeled looking. We don't always get great detail for the characters, but I think it's a very pretty style to play. This is really nice. I like this work because we have 3 hobbits going on a journey, one of them stopping to look back on the Shire and Hobbiton, probably longing to be home already with a mug of ale, but the other 2 are working their way on into probably which is the Old Forest. So it's just a really nice piece of art that I really, really like a lot. But yeah, so let's go ahead and go back to the single page view. And we get a letter to a friend from Gandalf, and so this is a letter for you as the players. And then we get into information about the setting. So we find out that the year is currently 2965 of the Third Age. 2965 of the Third Age. This is 20-some years after Bilbo has disappeared and then come back. And so we're going to be playing in between the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. We're towards the twilight of the Third Age. The shadow is slowly starting to rise again, to form again. And of course, obviously, this is going to be ending, with Frodo getting the ring and going on his journey to destroy it. But everything that we're going to be doing as players and lore masters is filling in this blank period, this time period in between Bilbo going on his adventure in The Hobbit and then Frodo going on his adventure in The Lord of the Rings. So we have information about adventuring in the Third Age, information about the peoples of Eriador, and then some information about the Shadow of the Past. So it breaks it down by year and information about what has been going on for these last 20 years or so. So this will be really interesting information for the lore master to have, but it's also in the players section of the book, so the players can be taking a look at this as well. Again, really beautiful line art throughout the book as well. This image of Gandalf entering into a hobbit hole is great. We do get some information about the different roles that players will take on. We have the player heroes and we have the lore master, who is going to be the person running the game itself. I'm getting another 2-page spread here going into the new rules section. In the new rules section, we're gonna stick around with this for a little bit. Great piece of art here again of the 3 trolls that are turned to stone by Gandalf in The Hobbit. So if you've not read The Hobbit, a little bit of a spoiler there for you. But these are recurring. It's a recurring image that shows up a lot in either the films, the animated versions, as well as the live action. This is a really fun part of the book The Hobbit. So the 3 trolls having been turned to stone and forever there as statues. But now we're getting into the new rules of the game and the structure that the game is going to take. They tell us really quickly here that the game is broken down into kind of these 3 pillars of adventure: combat, council, and journey. Now, the one here that everybody who plays 5th edition is going to be really used to is combat. And they tell you right here that combat is a necessity in a world where the shadow threatens to cover the land in darkness, and the Lord of the Rings role-playing relies primarily on the core rules for combat in 5e. So you're going to need at least the free PDF that Wizards of the Coast makes available for anybody using the 5th edition rule set, explaining to you how combat works. So once you have that, then you're pretty much good to go with your 5th edition information. You don't need to purchase any of the 5th edition books. You can just get that free PDF. It's a little over 150 pages or so of information. And this book does not really get into combat right here because you're going to be using the combat rules from 5e. But then it does talk about Council and Journey. Now, the Council is going to be a portion of the game of some social interaction that's going to be taking place between the player heroes and some of the wise and great peoples of Middle-earth. And a lot of this is going to be when the player heroes need something or want something, or when somebody from the council, a council, is probably trying to get them to do something. And so this is where the players are going to be interacting. They're going to be doing some skill rolls, trying to get that individual to side with them and to either give them some information or give them some things. But it's going to be a real fun way to play that social interaction between the players and the NPCs that has a little bit more of a mechanic to it. And then there's also the journey, which is a big part of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I mean, there is a lot of walking, riding, flying that takes place every so often throughout the books. And so journeying is going to be a big portion of the adventure here as well. And so there's a whole set of rules to help out with the journeying portion also. Now, the company itself is made up of the player heroes, and you're going to have a patron, and there is such a thing as fellowship points, and you'll be earning those the same way you earn experience throughout the game. And as you have fellowship points, you can use those in the game mechanically to get benefits for your player heroes. And then your patron themselves, they also will be giving you some advantages. So we can see here some starting patrons that are optional for the lore master to bring to the players, or for the players to choose for themselves who do they want their patron to be. We have Balin, son of Fundin, Bilbo Baggins, Círdan the Shipwright, Gandalf the Grey, Gilrian, daughter of Dirhill, and Lady Goldberry and Tom Bombadil. And we can see each one of these that they have these columns: favored callings, fellowship points, additional advantage, and agenda. And that information is going to help the player heroes decide which one of these patrons they probably want to have as their patron, because each one of them is going to give them these advantages that the others won't. And so they can read through this information when choosing their patron. And then we have the idea of the safe haven. So in this game, we're going to find out here in a second that resting is very different from 5th edition. And so the safe haven is a very important place where the player heroes can go to get their long rests so that they can recover from the adventuring that they have been doing. Places that would be considered safe havens, maybe they go home back to the Shire if they're hobbits, or maybe they go to Rivendell and they go to see Elrond there. Those are some of the options for places that could be like safe havens for the player characters. Now, the game itself, I'm going to read this portion here because it does get into some ideas of new skills, and this is really interesting. So in Lord of the Rings in Middle-earth, magic is not quite so fantastic of a thing as it is in, let's say, Dungeons and Dragons. There's not a whole lot of spell casting or anything like that happening here. And so part of that, because of that, they're getting rid of 2 of the skills from 5th edition. That's Arcana and Religion. Both of those are out. And even the skill History has been renamed to Old Lore, and they've also added the skill Riddle to the game as well. And the Survival skill has actually been expanded into 3 separate skills. We have Explore, Hunting, and Travel. And then they even have the idea that when you are applying your medicine skill, it's going to be using intelligence now instead of wisdom as its base skill. So we have a bunch of new stuff here, and it gets into the idea of explore and hunting, old lore, riddle, and travel, so that you can better understand how those are going to be used in the game. And then they get into the idea of magical successes. And again, if you looking through this book, there are no spells in this book. You're not going to have magic casting specifically as something that the players are going to be doing, because this is a very low magic setting. But they get into magical successes and how it can benefit you in skill rolls or skill checks throughout the game as well. And so it's going to be fairly different for a lot of people who've played 5e before, not having all of that magic at hand. But I feel like they've done a nice job here in this game to lean into that low magic setting. And then we have some additional rules variants, things that we're going to be adding in here, and that is encumbrance is a little bit different, but it is also necessary as the fact that traveling is so important and journeying is so important in this game, that also an encumbrance is something that you're going to be using. I know a lot of 5e players just kind of wave encumbrance away and don't worry about it, but in this game, you'll be utilizing it. And then also resting is very different. It states here that player heroes can only benefit from long rests in sheltered and safe refuges. So you're not going to have just the easy opportunity to lay down and get a long rest. And not only that, but while you are actually journeying and you're on an adventure, your short rests must be at least 8 hours long. So you're no longer getting that 1 hour quick short rest either. So resting is very different here. It's a little bit, I guess you could say, grittier than regular 5th edition. Now, I did state earlier that this game is an adaptation of the One Ring 2nd edition, and this boxed text here in page 22 tells us that we can use the One Ring's dice. So some information if you want to. The One Ring 2nd edition is a D6 system, and they have special dice that they have created for Free League Publishing, and you can purchase them on their website. So if you decide you'd like to try to do something other than rolling the D20 that most of us who play 5e are used to, here's some information about how you can use the 6-sided dice that Free League Publishing has created as part of your 5e Lord of the Rings game. Then we get into rewards and virtues, and virtues are unique abilities and special talents characteristic of a given culture, and players get to select a new virtue when their player hero reaches certain levels in a calling. And again, a calling is the idea of are you playing a warrior, a fighter, are you playing kind of more of a priesty-like character or a monk? You know, all of those 5th edition things, there are certain callings in this game, and those callings come with specific virtues that they get to choose as your characters level up. And then rewards are pieces of war gear of superior craftsmanship granted to a player hero as an award for their deeds when they reach certain levels. It does say here rewards are not tied to a specific culture, and there's more information on the page listed. And shadow and corruption, this is something that the players are going to be trying to resist. They're going to be trying to resist gaining shadow because that's going to affect their player character. And then also if they were to try to do any misdeeds, attempting or performing any misdeeds, you were gaining shadow as well from that. Because again, your players in this game, they're called player heroes for a reason. The characters in this game are not meant to be played as evil. There's no alignment happening here in the Lord of the Rings 5e. You're actually playing people who are out for the betterment of the world. And so anything that you do that would be considered to maybe be misdeeds are going to be gaining you this shadow and corruption that will affect your player and add conditions to your players. And now we're jumping into Chapter 3. So that was a lot of rules, a lot of new things coming for this game. For those of you who are used to 5e, a lot of new things, but it's really well laid out, and I think it adds to the idea, again, of this low magic setting where players are meant to be heroes up against a really great evil. And now we're going into chapter 3, all about adventures and making our characters. So let's keep on going. So we've got a really fun piece of art here for this intro as well. Obviously, if we're looking from Lord of the Rings standpoint, we've got a Hobbit here, and then maybe we've got Gimli and Legolas and Aragorn here. We've got our dwarf, elf, and ranger. But again, all of these are going to be characters that you could be playing as, and maybe that's not specifically who it is, but it's another great piece of art to show off for your players. Now, getting into making your characters, we have heroic cultures to choose from, and each one is going to come with a description, typical names for that culture, cultural traits that are specific to that culture, and backgrounds. And the backgrounds you're going to choose, again, same as in regular 5e, you're choosing a background that's going to affect where your player is from or their history prior to them becoming a player hero. But it does show you here real quickly the 6 different cultures that you're going to have to choose from and what page they're on as we go forward. We start off with the Bardings, are Northmen of noble origins hailing from the wilder land. So you have the Bardings are one of your options, again, giving you that description, some typical names, some samples here for female names, Aldrif and Asfrid, and male names, Aegir and Arn. So give you some idea there for naming your characters, and they give you a nice little list for each one of those. And then cultural traits, we get some ability score increases, the idea for adventuring age, size, speed, and then they're Archers of Dale, starting virtue. So again, that's the virtue, and it tells you the page that you want to go to for this specific culture to choose from those virtues. Some information that these are a trading people, the languages that they speak, and then in the game it also gives us a standard of living that's going to come into play as well. And so this one, they say that their standard of living is prosperous. We get some backgrounds again to choose from, and each culture gives us 6 backgrounds. So just real quickly here for the Bardings, we have dragon stories by hammer and anvil, healing hands, gifted senses, a patient hunter, and word weaver. Each one of those giving us some skill proficiencies, some tool proficiencies, and distinctive features. So now that we've gone over one of those, we'll kind of quickly go through the other ones. You can also choose to be one of the dwarves of Durin's folk. You can also choose to be one of the elves of Linden, a hobbit of the Shire, men of Bree, and rangers of the North. Now, a few of those you will see actually do have another option in there, and that's choosing specifically where you're coming from or a part of that culture. So the Hobbits of the Shire is a really good example here, wherein you get into it. The last part here says cultural traits. You get a subculture choice, and for them you get the fallow hides, the harfoots, and the stores. And again, that's just giving you the idea that some of these hobbits are coming from different areas, and in those different areas there are some differences between the hobbits. You also get that with the dwarves of Durin as well, and so it's pretty interesting that they do that for some of the heroic cultures, but not all of them. Now we get into the callings. So this is, what is your player called to do? And you only get a few choices. You get 6. There's the captain, the champion, messenger, scholar, treasure hunter, and warden. And just like with the rest of 5e, you're going to get some primary abilities, you're going to get some saving throw proficiencies, armor and weapon proficiencies, and a description, and also their hit die, the die that you roll when you're regaining some of your health when you rest. Now, something that you're going to notice as we go through this is the fact that for each one of these callings, you're going to see their little chart, their layout, and the level only goes to 10th level. And that is because, again, going with the factor of a low-level magic setting, they don't expect your characters to play past 10th level. Now, they do give you some optional rules for how to go ahead and continue leveling your characters past 10th level, but 10th level is as high as they're expecting you to take your players. So again, we have pieces of art for each one of these, as well as, again, different paths that you can take with those characters, and then the information that you'll have, choices that you'll have for when you're leveling up your character as well. And then we get into crafts. Crafts are techniques that can be acquired by an adventurer from any calling, but they are the special domain of scholars. So this is getting a little bit into almost an area of magic, but not exactly. And so these are going to be available. They're almost more like feats that you can choose while leveling up your character as well. And then they do have information if you would like to have more than one calling, if you would like to multi-class, as they say for 5th edition, more than one calling. And then they do have a little chart here for you. I'm going to go down to a single page so we can see that a little bit better. You have to at least reach the ability score minimums here to choose to multi-call, but then also you get specific proficiencies that you gain from that extra calling that you take on. And then here's the information talking to you about if you're going to go ahead and play beyond 10th level, how you would do that. We get into some information about the equipment, the gear that is available for the players, and money, how that's working. So we have 1 gold piece equals 10 silver pennies, and 1 silver penny equals 10 coppers. I like it. It's very succinct. There's just the 3 different kinds, and it's a very easy exchange rate. So you can go through this rest of these pages showing you all of the different type of gear that's available. I like that we get art for a lot of these pieces of gear. I think that's a lot of fun. I appreciate that as well. And then we do get into a little bit of new gear and some special rules that will be showing up. We have hobbit-sized ponies and full-sized horses to look at. And then we are on to Chapter 4, which focuses on rewards and virtues. So as we get into rewards and virtues, we're going to see a list of some of the rewards that can be given. And again, rewards are kind of like almost like magic items. So magic weapons. So if you're getting like a +1 sword, it's not called a +1 sword in the game. It's a weapon that has been given one of these special abilities. And so you can see here on the rewards list, close-fitting armor, or close fitting, which is a reward given to a specific type of armor. It makes it so that if you get hit with a critical hit, it's actually a normal hit. That's kind of cool. I know that I would love to have that as a player. And then so you'll see beside the different reward what kind of equipment this would go with. So we've got some for armor, some for weapon, and some for shield. So a keen weapon is sharp or better balanced, and when you roll a 19 or 20, it's considered a critical hit. And then you have a grievous weapon. The weapon is strong and heavy, inflicting more harm on its targets. You gain a +1 bonus to damage rolls with this weapon. So some of the normal mechanics of having magical weapons, but in here they're just considered better made weapons or armor, rather than specifically just having magic on them. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be some magical treasure out there. There will be, and we'll get into that as well. But virtues, again, these are the pages that you're going to when you're making your player characters. Some of these virtues are coming from the heroic culture that you have chosen, but then there are other virtues that may be gained throughout the game as well. So you'll see here, this one specifically states virtues of the Bardings, and then we have a list of those, virtues of the dwarves, and we have a list of those. Same for the elves and for the hobbits, men of Bree, and the Rangers of the North. So you have all of these pages here with virtues, but then if you saw at the very beginning, we did have some that are just common virtues for players to choose from. And now we get into Chapter 5, the adventuring phases. So the game itself is broken down into these 2 phases. Chapter 5 is all about the adventuring phases, and then Chapter 6 is going to be about the fellowship phases. Adventuring phases are where you'll spend most of your time, and this is while your players are going on an adventure and they're journeying. The adventuring phase can take 1 session. It might take 2 or 3 sessions to go through an adventuring phase. But during those adventuring phase sessions, your players will be having combat, they'll be having councils, so those social interactions. And here's some information about the council sequence. There's an introduction, there's a set required amount of successes, and then there's the actual interaction. And so it kind of lends itself to a really great way to kind of mechanically go through it, but then also encourage players to role play the actual interaction that they have. So we have an introduction at the beginning of the council, and depending on how well the company is successful with that person, with their charisma check, then that's going to kind of lead into what's going to be required from them to succeed with their request. So you have a DC 15 charisma check that's going to be done by just 1 player, and you want to choose the best speaker, the spokesperson, the person who has that charisma. And on a success, the company can re-roll a single ability check during the rest of the interaction stage. If they succeed just by 5 or more, then the company can re-roll up to 2 failed ability checks. And if the charisma check fails by 5 or more, all player heroes will have disadvantage on all the ability checks in the interaction stage. So then we have our set required successes, and this lets us know it depends on how difficult the player characters are, or how difficult the NPC sees, I guess, the player heroes. And so if it's a reasonable request and the player heroes know this person pretty well, then all they have to do is succeed once. They have 1 successful roll, and then they're going to be able to get what they want. Otherwise, if it's a bold request and it's a little bit harder for that person, to the NPC, to want to give this thing to the company, then they're going to require 2 successes. And if the ask is outrageous, they have to have 3 total successes. So you have now set your requirements for success. You're either going to have 1, 2, or 3 successes to succeed in this council. And then you have the actual interaction, and it gives you what amount the player heroes need to roll in order to succeed. If the person, if the NPC is reluctant to give the players the thing, then it might require a DC 20. If they're fairly open to possibly giving the players what they want, a DC 15, and if they're very friendly to the players and they really want the players to get what they need, then it's going to be a DC 10. And again, you might have multiple chances depending on how well you rolled earlier at that introduction. And then depending on how well the whole interaction stage goes, you have your end of council, which explains if you had a success, if you had a failure or success with woe, or if you had a complete disaster, which even says it could be, the players might get imprisoned or attacked right away. So really cool information mechanics-wise of how to play out one of those moments in a game that comes up fairly often, where the player heroes need something from someone important, and that person, and they're asking that person for that thing. And so I really love the mechanics here for the council. I think it's a great addition to the game and can be easily now adapted to your other 5th edition games as well. And then we have journeys. So in journeys, all of the players are going to be taking on a specific role, either a guide, a hunter, a lookout, or a scout. And they're going to work together to set a path, a journey path, that they want to take. And it could be a long one or a short one. And if it's really long, then maybe the lore master is going to decide that they'll actually have to be multiple journeys, because they're going to have to stop along the way. But they're going to set their journey path, and that's going to be up to the players, and they have access to the map of Eriador, so that they can choose what path they would like to take to where they are going. And then you will have to make pathfinding checks. And so these are going to be the checks that the players are going to be rolling in order to successfully make their journey. And then, of course, there is the ending of the journey itself, and how well they did. If they're fatigued or not, they're going to be making some saving throws. And then there are areas of the hex map that we have that show that they're perilous areas. So when you look at that map, you'll see a legend showing areas that are more dangerous than others, and those areas are going to be affecting these rolls during the journey as well. So we always have an event resolution as well here. And then some information here on describing the journey events, which I think is really interesting for the lore master to have this information. And now we're on to chapter 6, which is the fellowship phase, which will always either at the end of an adventure phase or happen right before you start a new adventure phase. It's that middle period, and we're going to talk about that now. So the fellowship phase is what has been described often with 5th edition as downtime. This is the time that's taking place in between adventures sessions, at the adventure phases. You will have this downtime. And the 4 things that you're going to be doing when doing a fellowship phase is you're going to be choosing a specific duration of time. How long is this fellowship phase covering? Choose your destination. Where do you want this fellowship phase to take place? And the majority of the time when you do a fellowship phase, all the player characters, all the player heroes are together. They're choosing a specific destination that they all want to go. It's pretty much required. It needs to be a place that you know, a safe haven, a place that your heroes have been to or are associated with, whether that's going back home to the Shire if you're the Hobbits, or maybe to Rivendell, somewhere that you've been and that you know will be a safe place for you, and everybody goes to the same place. And then while you're there, you can have the spiritual recovery, which is trying to help your players get rid of any of the shadow or corruption that they've gained throughout the game. And then the very last thing that you'll be doing is you'll be choosing as a group an undertaking, something that as a group you're going to be doing. Some of the examples of undertakings are gather rumors, or possibly ponder storied and figured maps, or even maybe meet with your patron or a patron. So those are some of the undertakings that you might take during a fellowship phase, but again, you're just choosing one. So during a normal fellowship phase, you as a group set the duration of time, you choose a single destination, you try to recover any points that you may have taken in shadow, and then you choose one undertaking. Now, there is a different type of fellowship phase, and that is when Yule happens, which happens once every 3 fellowship phases. So every 3rd fellowship phase is considered Yule. Winter has come. It's the end of the current year. Everyone is going to get another year older. And at this point in time, a lot of the players everyone will separate, and they'll go home to their families, to see their families. And there are some special undertakings that can only be taken during Yule. And for those, you will see beside those undertakings, in parentheses, the word Yule. You can heal scars, you can raise an heir, which is very interesting. Same way that Bilbo chose Frodo. Frodo wasn't his son, but he adopted him and kind of then began to mentor him and train him up to be his heir. So that's something that they've used in this game as well. And then you can recount a story. So these are just a few of the undertakings that they have made available in the game. I do wish this list was longer, that there were more options, and I think eventually there will be. But again, the big thing to remember is that during a regular fellowship phase, you only get to do the one undertaking as a group. But during a Yule phase, everyone is separate, so everyone is going to get to do their very own undertaking, and then everybody will do a single company undertaking as well, which is just really interesting. So that'll happen every 3rd fellowship phase, will be that Yule fellowship phase. But again, this is just a really cool way to kind of grasp the idea of downtime, which doesn't usually come up specifically in other 5th edition games. Maybe it's like I've seen it played as like an individual adventure for one player, and sometimes the DM will text back and forth with that player or communicate with that player or even meet in person one-on-one and do a short little adventure just for them for their downtime. But this is like really downtime. This is when you get the chance to remove the shadow that you've gained while adventuring, and take on some special undertakings. So I think it's a really cool idea for the game. Now, the rest of the book is very focused on the lore master. We're not going to get too in-depth with these chapters because we've gone over everything that I really feel like is necessary for the players, but we'll get into just a little bit here in the next couple chapters. So Chapter 7 for the lore master is going to give you the ideas of the qualities that a lore master should have, and then some ideas about adventuring in Middle-earth. What are some of the big questions that you need to be answering when you're putting together your adventures? There's a little information about non-player characters and treasure as well. Some information about how there might be some magical treasure. And I do want to mention this real briefly here, the idea that magical treasure is going to be enchanted and be possessing blessings. So the idea of a bless, if you've played 5th edition and you know what it's like when you bless someone, you're giving them an extra die to roll towards skill rolls. And so when you are doing that in this game, it talks about items having a certain amount of blessings on them or having been made superiorly. And so when they give that, when they add a blessing die, the blessing dies can be either a D4, a D6, or a D8, depending on the proficiency bonus of the player themselves. And so if you have an item, if you find a sword that is enchanted with blessings, or a crown or a bracelet that is magical, then it's going to give you a certain amount of blessings that it can do every so often. And depending on the player's proficiency, that's how big that blessing die is. So as your character progresses, the blessing actually will get even better. So I think that was an interesting way of adding in, again, some magic items without breaking the idea of a low magic system. Nothing here is just breaking the game. And then, again, famous weapon or armor is a superior make, and so these are some of those weapons that would be like a reward that we talked about earlier. Could show up here as magical treasure when the players find hordes of treasure. So really cool information there for the lore master, and I just wanted to go over that real quickly about how they add in some information for magical things. So really interesting stuff there. Really great art. Oh my gosh, I haven't mentioned the art a whole lot throughout this, but I love this piece of art of Gollum. It is so visceral and cool. I absolutely think it's amazing. We get into some information about the shadow as well, and shadow points. I'm not going to get into all of that right now. If you're the lore master, you can dive into that as well, but it's going to be things that are going to press on your players as they are out there. We do get into some adversaries. This is almost like our bestiary. We have evil men, and we have for them some stat blocks. We have orcs, we have trolls, which again, another piece of fantastic art. This troll is awesome. We have undead, and we have wolves of the wild and nameless things. Now, we also get into a little bit the Eye of Mordor, and this is the awareness of the shadow of Sauron of the players, and this will come up as your players play, and it suggests not bringing it up until they've adventured for a little while. And then we get into the greater, wider world itself. Here's some information about Eriador and the areas within it, again with some NPCs and stat blocks for them throughout. Some tables for rolling, for if you go to the Prancing Pony. Some just really good things to have as the lore master at your fingertips. So that is the majority of this book. We're getting very close here to the end. We have the appendix as well, which talks about the different patrons with some information and some pictures for each one of them, so that you can have that ready to show off to your players. And then landmarks and building landmarks. And these are places where the adventures are going to take place. Some of the main parts of your adventure phases are going to happen at landmarks, and it gives you information on how to create landmarks. And then we do have the Star of the Mist, which is a landmark and a short adventure for you to run for your players right here in the core Compendium book. And so we're going to quickly just flip through that. And now we're here at the index, and we have our player character sheet as well. And then also a journey log, which will be needed when you go on your journeys. And then the hex map here at the very end of the book. So everybody, that is the book here for the Lord of the Rings 5e from Free League Publishing. Let's go ahead and come back to the table, and I will give you my final thoughts on this book. All right, everybody. So we are finished looking at the Lord of the Rings role-playing for 5e by Free League Publishing. This is another fantastic game that Free League has put together for all of their fans and hopefully people who are just finding them for the first time. Maybe you've come to this just because you love Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien and you just want to play in his world. Maybe you're coming to this because you're looking for a new setting for 5th edition and you just want to try something different. Or maybe you have played the One Ring 2nd edition, you've heard a ton about 5e, and you're like, maybe I find out a little bit about that game. Whatever the reason is that you are choosing to play the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, you have made a great decision because this is another wonderful game put together by Free League Publishing. The books themselves are beautiful. They made these nice hardcover, kind of a glossy finish, which is fitting with all of the other 5th edition books that are out there. It's a little different from the books that Free League has previously put out, but again, I think they're trying to fit into a little bit of the mold of what people who play 5e are used to finding. But the inside pages are still very similar to what Free League normally puts out, which is actually my preferred preference. It's got a nice little cottony feel to it. So I absolutely love Free League Publishing. They're continuing to knock it out of the park. I don't think I've seen one of their games that I didn't fall in love with and want to run for my players. And this is no different. Can't wait to dive back into Middle-earth. I love that setting. I love the movies. I love the books. So very, very excited. Thank you to Free League Publishing for sending this along. And if you're interested in playing it, you can head over to freeleaguepublishing.com, check out this game and all the other fantastic games that they're putting out. You can also head over to tabletopgamingguild.com and learn out a little bit more about us and check out the channel. If you like the video, give it a like, maybe subscribe to the channel. And everybody, thank you for watching. I hope this has helped. And until we talk again, keep on playing games.